Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our sponsor-led webinar. We have three really great topics today that we're going to go through. The session is also being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel if you want to review it for later or share it to any of your colleagues. Let's jump right in and start with our first topic here, Diverso Energy. So they're going to be discussing geothermal, the hottest trend in new rentals.
Hi, my name is Tim Weber, and today I want to talk to you about geothermal, which is the hottest trend in new rentals. So a little history on Diverso Energy. Prior to 2014, we were an engineering firm operating for about a decade, and in 2014, we founded Diverso Energy with the intent to be a full-service geothermal utility provider where we design, build, own and operate geothermal assets. April of 2023, we were acquired by Diff Capital Partners, and since then we have turned into a full-service geothermal design, build, construct. All aspects of construction are now in-house and working with developers across the Greater Toronto area. So if we take a step back and look at where the real estate market is as a whole right now, no surprise to anyone, it looks a lot different than it did 5 years ago. And I think this all started with rising construction costs, which were compounded by supply chain issues. And then post-COVID, we saw significant interest rate increases, which impacted, obviously, construction costs themselves, construction financing, long-term takeout financing, and then also the absorption rate for condos as buyers can no longer afford to purchase condos. And on top of that, there's a looming carbon tax, which nobody really knows where that's going to go, but still a long-term threat. And through all of this, we saw the transition where we were, maybe an 80-20 condo to rental market. Now I think it's the inverse. We've seen a lot of condo projects that have been converted to rentals just for financial reasons, a little bit more certainty. And also because of the lifeline thrown out by the federal government in the form of the CMHC MLI Select financing, which really allowed these rental opportunities to actually make sense for the performers to work. And without that, the performers just did not work. And we're seeing stranded projects that were just not going to market. So as much as the MLI Select program is a lifeline, you still need to qualify. And what does that mean? And I think you can break it down into three main categories. There's affordability, which obviously is a challenge. There's energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reductions. And to hit the full to get the full 100-point distribution to maximize your, your financing benefits, you need to be 40% above building code or 40% above business as usual. Third requirement is accessibility. And if we look at those three combined to get to that 100 points, to get the full benefit, because you have longer amortization, less equity required, loan to value ratio is increased. These are all things that are very sacred to you as a development community to make these projects work, for them to pencil out and to actually move forward. So how does geothermal impact these things? Well, it impacts number two, and that's energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reductions, which is probably the biggest nut anyway. And geothermal as one technology, not only do you get to that 40%, in most cases, you're meeting it and exceeding it by a significant amount. So geothermal is a market-ready solution. And I think that's something I can say now with confidence. The market in Toronto has changed significantly. The industry has changed. It's evolved. In fact, I've traveled all over North America, and there's nowhere in Canada, the United States, where there's a full turnkey market-ready solution for multi-residential, high-density urban buildings like we're seeing in Toronto. And it's been a long time in the making. The timing is perfect as we as an industry have been ramping up over the last decade. We're now in a position to meet this new demand, which is caused by these three things: 40% requirement for MLI Select, municipal standards such as the Toronto Green Standard. It's now transitioned into version 4, which is finally that point that's sort of moving the needle. It's driving a shift from business as usual, a departure from the norm, creating some problems for developers and consultants alike, trying to meet these new aggressive standards, and conventional envelopes, conventional heating and cooling equipment's not getting there. So you need something that'll bring you over that threshold, and that something is geothermal. So not only meeting these new carbon and energy targets, which solves an immediate problem, which is how do we get through construction? How do we get this built? Building to start. And there's also the long-term benefits. And I think in the rental space, everything's measured by NOI, net operating income. There's a few ways of improving your NOI. One is to reduce your cost, reducing your operating cost and your construction costs. Reducing construction costs is a challenge. So how do you reduce your operating costs? And there's different ways. We're seeing more projects that are downloading energy costs on tenants, getting it off the balance sheet. But there's also things like maintenance, repairs, and capital reserve. Boilers, cooling towers, those require maintenance, those require repairs, those require capital reserve. Depreciable asset. And because geothermal eliminates the needs for that equipment, it also eliminates the costs associated with that equipment. And by that NOI increase also increases building valuation using, whatever cap rate metric you want to use, increased NOI, increased valuation. And I think, there's soft benefits beyond just the NOI. There's, you'd be hard pressed to find a REIT in the market now that's not focused on low carbon buildings. They do not want to own long-term assets that do not align with long-term policy, long-term, whether it be internal metrics they're trying to meet, ESG targets. There's internal, external pressures demanding that their assets are future-proofed, low carbon, and ready for net zero, if not there already. So not only will they potentially pay more trying to offload a building that's not already transitioned, that's not been electrified, transitioning away from fossil fuel, could become a problem in the future. And the nice thing about geothermal is doing it pre-construction is a whole lot easier than trying to retrofit down the road. It's important to have options. And prior to 2014, prior to starting this utility model, there really was one option for geothermal. It was hire an engineer to design the system, put it out for tender, hire a driller, and kind of cross your fingers it all comes together during construction, and cross your fingers it meets the energy and cooling needs of the building long term. Well, that's no longer the only option on the table. It still is an option, but there's better options. Option one is the zero cost utility model, which is sort of the bread and butter of our business, where we take on all of that responsibility, designing it, building it, constructing it, operating it, guaranteeing that performance long term. Essentially take all the negatives off the plate and leave behind the positives, which is the carbon, energy, the branding, the bragging rights, the cachet that goes with the low carbon building, meeting your ESG targets. Those things remain. The risks and costs are eliminated. And then there's a bit of a hybrid between the two, and that's the design build model, where we would still take responsibility for the execution and the design, but ultimately the asset is on the developer's balance sheet. It's still ultimately their responsibility to build it, their responsibility to operate it, whereas we act as an agent to provide that, design, build, turnkey solution. And there's no real right or wrong. There's nuances to every project that are unique, nuances to the business model of each project that are unique. So it's important, I think as an industry, we try to tailor the business model to meet the specific business objectives, energy objectives on a per project basis. Other long-term upsides, there's carbon reduction. A typical multi-residential building, 200 to 300,000 square feet, 200 to 300 units, seeing an average of about 300 tons of carbon reduction, which is incredibly significant, especially considering that's just coming from one technology. 2 to 4 million liters of water reduced. Incredible environmental impact, and with that goes the chemical treatment that's also associated with cooling towers. And then there's the 30-year net occupancy savings. And I think the net occupancy in the 30 years, the significance there is long-term certainty, cost certainty. If you think of a typical building, everything's a variable. The cost to maintain the building is a variable. The cost of trades, access to trades, interest rates, even rental income is a variable based on market conditions. Future policies are a variable. The nice thing about geothermal, once it's in, whether it's a debt service or a utility charge, that's a predictable charge, a predictable rate where there's cost certainty for 30 years, which is a luxury rarely seen in commercial real estate. The other nice thing is you get a technology that's so significant in so many ways, but it's out of sight, out of mind. It's not like nothing against solar panels, but solar panels are on the roof. You need to find room for them. You need to deal with that. This is a piece of equipment and infrastructure that's buried underneath the building, pre-construction. It's 600 to 800 feet deep. You don't see it. You don't have to deal with it. You don't need space for it. It doesn't encumber the land in any way. It really has no negative impact on the building whatsoever. It's really all just a positive impact. And the other thing too with that is because it's underneath the building and because it's made out of high density polyethylene pipe, which is the same pipe that gas companies use to transport natural gas, it will outlast the building. It's designed for an 80 to 150 year life cycle. It doesn't get impacted by UV rays. It's under the building. It can't be fractured. It can't be damaged. It's protected. Can't be drilled into or hit by an excavator. It will literally outlast the building. So what are the alternatives? I think there are alternatives. As I mentioned earlier, every building is unique. And is geothermal the right fit for everything? No, I think it's the right fit for most buildings. Sometimes smaller buildings, 20 to 30 unit buildings, might be a better fit for air source VRF. It may be a very viable, practical option as opposed to geothermal. The other option, if you were highly opposed to geothermal, you could meet the MLI Select and you could probably meet the Toronto Green Standard through envelope and other equipment upgrades. The challenge with that is it's obviously incredibly expensive. You're probably now getting into the realm of some pretty complicated out-of-the-box pieces of equipment, which may create an operating issue down the road just through complexity. But even if you do meet those targets, what you're not going to do is future-proof the building, because a building where the energy efficiency is achieved through the envelope is still burning fossil fuel. And ultimately, the point of MLI Select and the Toronto Green Standard, it's all about the energy transition from fossil fuel to electrification and being done in a very effective, efficient way. And putting in punched windows does not eliminate natural gas. So it's not going to help you with the future proofing. It's not going to be a building that's attractive to a REIT. It's not going to help you reduce your operational maintenance and repairs and capital reserve payments. It's not going to help your NOI. It's a short-term solution with no long-term benefit. There's a hybrid solution, which is really the only viable option for tall buildings. The 60-story buildings with small lots where there's just not enough physical space to put in enough bore field or enough boreholes to address the entire energy needs of the building. So in that case, we look at a hybrid, cooling towers handling the peak cooling, boilers handling the peak heating. You still meet the MLI Select, you still meet the TGS, you still get a significant 60 to 70% natural gas reduction, carbon reduction, but working within the confines of a small property and a tall building. And that is it. Thank you very much for your time.
Awesome. Okay, we have Tim with us now as well. If anyone has any questions, put them in the chat and we'll go through them. I'll give you guys a second to write what you want to write. Does anyone have any questions for Tim about his presentation? Tim, did you want to unmute and add anything?
Um, hey, good morning. No, I don't think there's really anything to add. More than happy to answer any questions or address any concerns or anything that anyone requires clarification on.
Okay, we got one there.
So question is, how's it working with the city during design? Sorry, I'm reading that. How's it working with the city during design approval for geothermal typical timelines? Yeah, that's a great question. So it depends on the municipality. We find for the most part, Toronto in particular has a geothermal specific permit. So it's a standalone partial permit. It's an extension of mechanical. It's relatively simple. And the turnaround time on that is about 4 weeks. Mississauga, Oakville, pretty similar. Right now, there's no municipalities in the GTHA that, the geothermal permitting, it's not complicated. There is an ECA that's required through the MOE, but that's kind of a permit provided. It's a drilling permit, but that's the responsibility of the contractor. So not something the developer needs to worry about. Next question, does GeoLoan qualify for all points for MLI? Well, not a loan because the MLI is broken into categories. There's affordability, I think is a major one. Sustainability is a major one. So geothermal covers off the energy portion, which I think when you talk to most consultants, that's the bigger nut of the 2 or 3 other requirements. So we typically find geothermal, with the exception of places like Ottawa or Calgary, colder climates, where it on its own, it will be really close to getting that 40% energy efficiency, and the GTA will easily meet and exceed that 40%. This question, is there at the end a certification or a graded certification? There is not anything in place right now for geothermal, which, that in itself creates a little bit of a concern, I think. And it's why it's so important that, when you look at geothermal, it is a living, breathing entity under the building that your heating and cooling system is now dependent on. And on larger projects, anything over probably 80, 90 units, the buildings will be cooling dominant. The bore field does need to be managed. There's an energy imbalance there between heating and cooling that needs to be managed long term. So it's really important that the system's designed right, it's integrated properly into the building, and there's also somebody monitoring and managing that system long term. Are there any ministry approvals required? Not ministry approvals. As I mentioned, that ECA it's a drilling permit, environmental compliance permit that every contractor to drill in Ontario must have, but that's kind of a standing permit. Again, doesn't really impact the developer or any contractors other than the drilling contractor. Outside of that, there are no other approvals required. Depending on location, we'll do a test hole. Most of the greater Toronto area, that's not necessarily required. And if we do, it's more just to fine tune, how many bins will require for spoils or how much casing will we need for the amount of overburden, not so much to look at the feasibility of geothermal. The only time I've seen, I'm trying to think, in the last 10 years, the only project where we weren't able to move forward or geothermal was not feasible was actually in Collingwood. And that was because we hit natural gas in our test hole around 80 feet. And it just, it wasn't feasible. It was unsafe. So geothermal had to be abandoned. But that, to my memory, is the only time I think in the last decade or longer where we weren't able to move forward in Ontario. Does this work for standalone homes? Absolutely. There's probably tens of thousands of homes across Ontario with geothermal. Historically, it was mostly used for retrofitting rural homes that were on oil, propane, electric resistance heat. But yeah, that's actually where geothermal started, with standalone homes. The new multi-res is actually a much newer business than standalone, or a newer market than standalone homes. Is geothermal cost effective for industrial? Yeah, that's a tricky question. I hate to say it, but it depends. The challenge with industrial, I mentioned earlier the importance of that load balance. Geothermal works well when there's a relatively equal heating and cooling load. And for industrial, that's not usually the case. Usually it's far more heating, a lot less cooling. Um, there's ways to overcome that. Horizontal loops, if there's lots of land, that would work fine. The other issue is, with multi-res, geothermal is a great fit because in most cases it's some type of hydronic, water source, heat pump, fan coil, chillers. So that mechanical system lends itself really nice to geothermal, whereas industrial, you have to look at, well, what's the baseline for mechanical and what's the cost to shift that mechanical to a system that can be integrated seamlessly with geothermal. So yes, it's possible. There's just a lot more variables in industrial than there are in multi-res. Are the systems open or closed loop? So everything we do is closed loop. Probably 95, 98% of the geothermal systems in Ontario are closed loop. Open loop is a possibility. There's just a lot of variables with open loop. Open loop systems on a large building will use millions and millions of liters of water a day. And that water you're pulling water out of the aquifer, running it through equipment and dumping it back into the aquifer. So, water quality, how much scale or how much iron is in the water and how is it going to scale up the equipment? The quantity of water in the aquifer is a major variable there. So we tend to stick to closed loop systems because they're predictable. You can design accordingly, you can manage it accordingly, and how it works on day one is exactly how it works in 30, 40 years, providing the system's managed properly. You're just removing less variables with closed loop.
Perfect. Okay, last call for questions. I'll also have everyone's contact information when it's posted on YouTube. So if you have further questions or any quote requests or anything, you'll be able to reach out to the team as well. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Tim, very much.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime.
If I get any more, I'll send them your way. Okay, so for now, let's go to our next educational session, which is with Torkin Mains, mitigating risk of trade claims, key practices for developers. Yes, Ed, there will be a copy posted on YouTube.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Houck. I'm a partner in Torkin Mains Construction Group. Our construction group regularly deals with claims by trades for delays, price increases, both during projects and dealing with aftermath when legal claims ensues. We find that during the project, dealing with such claims is complex and costly to negotiate when they arise. You are in certainly a more adversarial role post-contract than when you're negotiating contract, and you're often likely to get a lack of transparency on a trade's bid assumptions or costing information. And of course, in the event you are obliged to resort to formal legal processes to resolve claims, whether through arbitration, adjudication, or court processes, those processes can be extremely costly and time-consuming for developers to address. So what we wanted to provide you are some basic practices and due diligence to assist with neutralizing or at least providing better leverage in dealing with trade claims. And we're going to focus on 6 high-level concepts. Concept 1, use of industry standard contracts. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the use of CCDC and CCA contracts, such as the CCDC-2 or the CCDC-17 contract. These standard form contracts provide an efficient method for contracting, and the industry is generally familiar with these forms of contracts. However, the contracts are drafted for general application. They are not intended to be specific for your project or its commercial needs. The contracts also provide relief to trades in many general instances. For example, in the event of change of laws or regulations, a trade can be entitled to both price and schedule relief. This is set out, for example, in the GC CCDC2, GC 10.2.7 clause. And we saw this frequently for COVID type claims. As another example, the standard terms provide relief for delays beyond a trade's control, for example, in provision GC 6.5. Finally, there's often a lack of certainty regarding delays to start or completion times in terms of how the standard form contracts are drafted and then executed. In summary, those contracts provide a solid foothold for trade to cert claims in many different ways. One practice to address this is to use supplementary conditions to better define, limit rights of the developer and the obligations of trades in the event of delays or conditions beyond a trade's control. Concept number 2, schedule and completion dates. Certainty regarding a baseline schedule in a contract is an issue that underpins many claims by trades. For example, is there a schedule that's attached to the contract? If not, is there a clear completion date settled in the contract? If a schedule is not available to be attached at the time of contract, when is it to be agreed to? And how will you identify that schedule? Often in, for example, CCDC2 standard terms, it provides that a schedule is to be delivered and agreed to, and often there is such a schedule that is exchanged between the parties, but the difficulty and the risk lies in how to identify that baseline schedule. Regularly, is there a clear communication back and forth between a trade and owner, consultant, that sets out what the definitive baseline schedule will be in circumstances where the schedule is not attached to the contract? So consider creating either clear documentation of that effect or ensuring that schedules incorporated into a contract after the fact are clearly identified. Deferral of a start date. Do you need flexibility? Is this a project that has financing? Will there be delays? Is there zoning, potential zoning or other type permit issues that may push back or have the need to alter the construction methodologies and timing of trades? For example, you can consider requiring work to commence upon a notice to proceed. Alternatively, consider providing a clause that provides an ability to extend the start date by a fixed period without financial consequences, if you're able to negotiate it, or at least cap the cost increases for any such extensions. Schedule extensions. Do you need to provide a cushion in your schedule? Alternatively, do you want and could lock in costs or cost increases based on formal extensions? Finally, contract project schedules and contract terms themselves should include specifics and certainty on the following concepts. For example, critical path dates for specific tasks, interim schedule milestones, such as schedule imperatives. If you're able to get down to the granular level of determining what milestones should be hit and when, you could talk about and consider including in your contract terms consequences for failing to meet interim milestones. For example, will you require a trade to accelerate at their own cost? Can you pass that risk on to trades? Consequences for failing to meet substantial performance dates. Do you want to include penalty clauses or liquidated damages clauses? Alternatively, do you want to include a performance schedule tied to beating or improving on a performance schedule as a carrot as opposed to the stick? There are many drafting points and concepts that one could devise and come up with in order to create certainty and deal with risk allocation on scheduling issues. And the key is to think through and what makes most sense for your project. Concept number 3, risk allocation. There are a number of clauses that allocate risks to trades for concepts or issues where the trade is arguably in a better position to manage and know. But the specific terms or the standard terms in CCDC and CCA contracts often do not expressly address this or include owner favorable clauses to address such concepts. For example, recovery of increased costs for site overhead or profit arising from delay. Do your contract terms lock in these costs? Do they cap these cost recovery? Do they exclude recovery altogether? What can you negotiate? In the absence of including such clear terms or negotiating, you might be left trying to negotiate after the fact on the trade's own numbers. Further example, how about unavailability or reduced efficiency of labor? We've obviously seen general labor shortages in many disciplines in the last few years. And when these type of issues arise, it can be difficult for a developer to evaluate after the fact. What was the trade's actual intended efficiency? Was it underestimated at the time the trade put in a bid? Is there an unimpacted portion of the work for which a standard efficiency could be measured to create a baseline or a measured mile approach? These concepts are difficult to address during the project. Consider allocating risks to trades for such labor shortages. In addition, consider inserting audit clauses or open book type clauses to improve an owner's ability to evaluate and obtain transparency for such claims. As a further example, how about changes to sequencing of work or areas of work that are available? Does the project require an element of flexibility? Are there practical limitations surrounding the project, such as corridors, zoning, or close neighbors? Should the staging sites and areas be identified in the contract? It is difficult, again, to evaluate a trade's assumption that went into their bid after the fact. These type of logistical issues we find are often discussed at pre-construction meetings or between the construction teams, but are often not included expressly in contracts, or often with not much specificity. In other words, often the procurement teams are not necessarily the delivery teams in terms of the information flows. So as such, does it make sense to include trades assumptions in the contracts? How much area do they need? Will they be required to coordinate areas with other trades? What are their intended means and methods? Not to specify those means and methods, but to understand the practical limitations that they are saying at the outset are required. If this information is available at the outset, it may assist with drafting some of these risks and transferring them to the trade. Finally, risk of material shortages and cost escalation during construction. Obviously, this issue continues to be a hot item, and the claims we've seen are increasing in this regard. And it is important, if you're looking to alleviate risk for cost escalation type claims, that those claims are identified specifically in the contracts. And another way to look at it is what type of items could be bought up front. Should you be identifying certain key material suppliers or certain materials where deposits could be provided up front, security arrangements provided for, and storage, again, upfront and listed specifically in your contract. Concept number 4, contract formation and procurement. One way to address contract risks is to actually include a draft form of your contract with your tender packages. This would include a full set of your supplementary conditions, such that you are obliging bidders to accept your form of contract and trying to mitigate against contract negotiation after the fact. On the flip side, we see a number of contracts include trade terms with unintended consequences. For example, often a trade will deliver a purchase order, a bid, a budget, or some pricing terms when either in the tender stage or depending on how the bid was solicited. These terms are then often included as part of the contract. They're either physically attached as a schedule or an appendix to the end of the contract, or sometimes they're listed within a set of contract documents, along with the supplementary conditions, the drawings, and any other documents that are relevant to the trade scope. However, including these type of documents can have unintended consequences. They often refer to industry standard terms. In other words, incorporating a set of additional contract terms or include a trade friendly or their own custom terms. So when incorporating contract documents and specifically trade pricing, you make sure that you've considered what terms are referenced in and what you're including as a contract document. It may be safer from a drafting perspective and certainly clearer to simply include the business terms, the pricing terms, or copy and paste those terms into a fresh scope of work or pricing terms along with the other similar terms that are already set on your contract, as opposed to adopting what you're given from a trade. Finally, it's obviously important to ensure that the contract is executed by both parties. This should be done prior to mobilization and ideally prior to a first draw. Without having clarity as to what the contract is, meaning you've got a document that has a signature on both sides and parties can agree, we've seen many disputes over whether, for example, trade bids are included, whether post-construction discussions, letters then have contractual importance. So it's important to clearly have a contract that has all the four corners of what the parties intended and negotiated for. Concept 5, project documentation. In your contracts, it is key to provide hard deadlines for written notification from trades of their claims. A lot of contracts will have standard terms that will say, for example, if there's a delay, to provide written notice within 10 days of the occurrence of the delays. But you would want to ensure that those notice periods make sense for your contract, that your contract administrators understand what those notice periods are, and of course that they are followed up upon and enforced, such that you clearly have written documentation that both complies with those notice, that reminds the trade or the party of those notice periods, and then follows up to the extent that there isn't any clarity or, in fact, there are notices for such delays. In addition, consider requiring trades to provide clear statements of claims when they deliver their draws. This could be set out in the contract and then set out in the form of the draws as well. Consider having invoices include a waiver of trade claims unless specified in the invoice. In other words, set up a form of invoice such that they have to have a schedule which lists all their claims, such that they're waiving all other claims. Finally, consider requiring a trade to provide waivers as part of an application for substantial performance. All four of these concepts are intended to provide hurdles and notice requirements such that the owner is provided with contemporaneous notice and the ability to address these claims when they arise and not after the fact. I'm sure we've all had cases where a trade is nearing completion, applying for substantial performance, and then you receive a claim for delay on the project. These concepts are intended to help flush those type of issues out, or in the absence, if they're going to be made in any event, provide you with a better defense and more leverage to defeat the claim. Finally, concept 6, project performance and budgets. When preparing performance and budgets, consider including provisions or contingencies for the following: trade insolvencies and defaults. Those provisions and contingencies could include, for example, if you want to obtain bonds for trade performance, or include legal costs to deal with liens and defaults. 2, extended site overheads or Division 1 costs. What could those be? What would the burn rate be? What are the key risks that may push the project and extend it? Consider micro incentives offered during construction for interim milestones. Consider incentives for achieving budget. Consider incentives for achieving a quality threshold. For example, number of value of units and deficiencies, a deficiency threshold per unit. Consider incentives for achieving schedule. And finally, consider contingencies for a settlement amounts for trade claims at the end of a project. For example, you could consider a percentage of a contract value depending on the risk of that specific contract. So in summary, 6 key due diligence and best practices to mitigate and address trade claims. 1, consider use of supplementary contracts to modify trade contracts. Supplementary conditions. 2, consider allocation of risk and certainty regarding schedules and expectations on schedule performance and default. 3, ensure contracts and supplementary conditions are drafted to address commercial needs for your project. 4, include form of contract with tender and avoid accepting trade terms. 5, manage trade claims in real time, obtain notice and waiver provisions. And 6, consider risk of claims in performance and budgets. Thank you and good luck with your projects.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. Does anyone have any questions? Please put them in the chat. Ryan's here with us now. Brian, do you want to unmute and add anything?
No, I hope I didn't put everybody to sleep, and appreciate listening through my presentation.
Yeah, no, it was really informative. You got a nice comment there from Ed. I will put Ryan's information in the YouTube as well, so if anyone has any inquiries. But does anyone have any questions right now? Okay. I guess you covered the subject matter really well. There's no questions for you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so we're going to move on to our last presentation then, which is TerraNet, and they're going to be discussing easements.
Hello and welcome. My name is Alicia Flores, and I am a customer success representative for TerraNet Commercial Solutions. Today, I will introduce you to our GeoWarehouse platform through an informative demo, followed by an outline of TerraNet's easement program for government organizations and utility companies. GeoWarehouse is a web-based centralized property information source that provides state-of-the-art mapping and research tools, as well as professional reports. GeoWarehouse services all real estate board members and land professionals in the province of Ontario. In today's demo, you will learn how to conduct a property search leveraging the map capabilities, generate property reports to validate ownership and property details, and how to access additional analysis reports to enable you to perform a comprehensive property search. GeoWarehouse subscribers have the ability to search anywhere in the province of Ontario using the search bar at the top of the window using a municipal address, an individual's name or corporation, the PIN number, which is the property identification number. This is a 9-digit unique identifier from the land registry. ARN, which stands for Assessment Roll Number, and statutory documents such as instrument or plans. Users may also search by lot and concession by selecting the drop-down arrow next to all. App search capabilities is also available. You can adjust the map window to the area of interest and choose the property from the map window. You can adjust the map using the tools available on your device. Navigate to the area of interest and zoom in using the plus sign at the top right of the map window. If you wish to zoom out, use the minus sign. Once you are in the area of interest, you may use the map tool to help you review the property to ensure that you have selected the correct property you are interested in. At the top right of the window, you will find several icons. The third icon is primarily used to adjust the map window. The default setting is Standard Road Map View. To review the area using an aerial view, you can select the second option. This will display the aerial imagery provided by Google. Google provides different views. One is the bird's eye view. This is applicable if the checkbox is available. The second view is Google's standard imagery. To make changes, remove the 45-degree option by removing the check from the box, and the map will adjust depending on the area. A high-resolution aerial view is also available and provided by First Base Solutions. By selecting the option for Enhanced Aerial, you will notice the view changes. You may leverage the different map views to do a visual scan to review and confirm that you have selected the correct property you wish to obtain information for. To choose a property report from the map window, single left-click on your mouse. If you are using a tablet, simply hold down on the screen using your finger or stylus pen, and an information card will display. You may select Street View or Property Report. The Street View will open Google's Street View imagery, where you can review the area. To return to the property on the map window, select the return arrow located at the top left side of the information box. To request a property report, select Property Report. The property report allows you to validate information about the property. In the property details section, you will be able to confirm the name of the owner and the date of purchase. You will also be able to confirm the lot size and view a complete legal description for the subject property. Subscribed users have exclusive access to the GeoWarehouse store, which offers a host of products. To the right of the property details section, you will find a quick link to a parcel register. This report is an official record provided by the Land Registry, which includes real-time information on all active mortgages, liens, and encumbrances that are registered against the property and can affect the equity or land use. In the property report, you will find a lot of valuable information for your due diligence. In the plans, surveys, and easements section, you will have the ability to invest in plans that have been deposited within the Land Registry system. Within this section, you will also have access to Protect Your Boundaries easement counter technology, which will notify you of all easements that affect each property in Ontario. If you wish to review easement information, you may look at statutory documents such as parcel registers, plan documents, or instruments that may be referenced in the legal description. In partnership with Protect Your Boundaries, a leader in property and boundary expertise, GeoWarehouse offers a selection of reports with comprehensive title, easement, and ownership information written in plain English, and supported by official Ontario Land Registry documents for the property. You can make the choice to review statutory documents or invest in Protect Your Boundary reports. Both options are available to you in GeoWarehouse. Thank you for taking time to learn more about GeoWarehouse and how it may help you in your business. If you would like to learn more about GeoWarehouse, please visit our website at www.geowarehouse.ca and click on Contact Us. Now we will move over to talk about Terranet's easement program and the importance of creating a centralized spatial easement inventory for government organizations, utilities, and telco companies. What is an easement? An easement is a portion of property that is registered on title and allows another party to cross private property for a specified and limited purpose. Registered easements are critical in order to assess municipal or utility infrastructure, such as water, wastewater, hydro, gas, or storm infrastructure. Why is easement management important? Although easements represent a primary asset for many organizations, it's an asset that is often overlooked. Easement records are managed in multiple systems, and information is often decentralized and stored in various locations. It can take a long time to search and access what is needed, and even then, the information might not be accurate. Organizations open themselves up to risk if they don't know what easements they have, where they are, and what rights of use are allowed. Incomplete and inaccurate easement information can lead to unnecessary risks in asset management, infrastructure operations, and public safety. How do you know if you need Terranet's easement program? Does your staff currently spend a significant amount of time carrying out searches for easement information? By having all information easily accessible and having confidence in the accuracy of that information results in considerable time savings. Is there a risk that something may be inaccurate, missing, or out of date? Not knowing about your easements not only leaves your organization vulnerable, but it can also impact incident response times and public safety. Terranet's easement program can assist in mitigating these risks by identifying and centralizing easement data. Is your easement information located in different places? Does your staff conduct manual searches for easements? While this is difficult for everyone, it's especially problematic for any staff out in the field. Having this information in a centralized electronic database would allow staff to access easement data on mobile devices when they're in the field. Does your organization increasingly rely on its GIS network? Terranet's easement program involves analysis, identification, and mapping of all the easements registered in your organization's favor in order to centralize the inventory in an electronic format that can be consumed by different enterprise systems through your GIS network. It's more reliable, secure, and easy to manage. Terranet's easement program consists of a number of phases. First, we generate an easement report that lists all registered easement type instruments within an organization's jurisdiction that can potentially create an easement through the land registry process, upon which we conduct a document review and evaluation, where we analyze the instruments to determine whether easements are created. Moving on to easement mapping, we generate polygon features identifying the spatial extent of the valid easement instruments based on the descriptions and plan information. This is laid over existing parcel mapping fabric. Easement purpose identification is critical for organizations to understand whether their interest in the easement is for the correct purpose, such as stormwater, sanitary sewer, hydro, and that rights are properly granted. Finally, an important part of the program is easement mapping maintenance, which ensures the information is kept up to date based on monitoring of new easement and release of easement registrations. Upon completion of an easement project, Terranet delivers an easement report, easement mapping layer, registered easement instrument images, and registered plan images. This complete and integrated set of data enables the creation of a centralized spatial easement inventory. A centralized spatial easement inventory allows various teams to easily access easement information, drawings, and historical documents with a few clicks of a mouse. The time savings, operational efficiency, and cost reductions can be felt throughout an entire organization, be it government, utility, or telco. Many governments and utilities are recognizing the importance of easement identification and mapping in a centralized system. For those that have engaged in the Terranet easement program, the benefits have been many, and the return on investment has been both immediate and enormous. Terranet is committed to connecting customers to valuable data and modernization solutions that help them analyze and map easements and other land-related data, all with the end goal of helping municipalities and utility companies deliver greater value to the residents of their communities. Thank you for taking the time to learn about the Terranet easement program. For more information, please contact Richard Norris.
Perfect. Okay. So we have Alicia here with us online. We see we have a question already from Ed. Alicia, do you want to unmute?
Yes, good morning, everyone. All right, so I do see a question. If one finds a Rogers box on the property is not mentioned in easement on survey, what needs to be done? Also, does Rogers need to pay for this to be formalized? Thank you so much for asking that question, Ed. Now, with respect to easements, they would have to be registered within the land registry system in order for them to actually display. So, with a Rogers box, it's really hard to actually even answer that question because with respect to what the process would be for an easement, that would be done by the company itself to actually formalize that. So then they get exclusive access to be able to access that box as an example only for that purpose, right? So an easement would be the right specifically to access something within the premises of that property only for that. So it would only depend if really that box or that is on the property and Rogers needs to access it, then at that time they would have to be in contact with legal professionals to be able to have that easement. Otherwise, if they don't have an easement on the property, they cannot enter the property, right? Because then that would be, there's no right to be able to do that. So I do see another question. Do you need a Terranet account, the ability to pull pins in addition to get access to the Terranet easement program, or could you have access to only the easement program mapping plans and instruments? So I did, thank you so much for posting that question there, Carlos. So I did showcase two different products that we offer here at Terranet. One of them is the Geo Warehouse and the other one is the Terranet easement program. So you would be able to subscribe depending on your line of business. You don't have to subscribe to all of the products that we have. If you access the Terranet easement program, you'll be able to request the information with respect to the pins, or if you have a different Terranet account, it would also give you access to be able to request the pins. So hopefully that answers your question.
Perfect. We'll give it another second here. Any other questions before we end for the day? Type them in. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you.
Oh, how do I determine if Rogers has access?
That's a great question. I mean, if you do have access to our programs, if, for example, you have access to Geo Warehouse, and you would be able to look at the property report and access through the plan surveys and easements section. Now, if you do not have access to our programs, then it would have to be looked at with when it comes to actual registered documents. So it all depends on what access you have at this time.
Perfect. Okay, well, we ended early today, which is good. Everyone can get back to work. Thank you all for coming and helping. Thank you, Ed, for all your questions. I'm going to be posting this on YouTube, and I'll send everybody the link if you want to rewatch it. I'll also include some contact information if you want to reach out to any of the companies. Otherwise, thank you all and have a wonderful day.